Hey guys, and welcome to your first online WAP video of the year. I hope you guys are doing well. Um, these videos on the global impacts of the world wars are going to be a three-part series in which we will look at how World War I, the interwar period, and World War II affected global economics and global politics, and generally just led to a totally new world situation by 1945. In this first video, we'll just be looking at World War I and its aftermath. We're going to be covering specifically the impact of World War I on Europe, the impact of World War I on the global imperial system, the impact of World War I on the Ottoman Empire and the Middle East, and the impact of World War I on Japan and China. Before we get into that, though, I just want to spend a minute to talk about why most historians view the World Wars as the beginning of a new stage in world history. Before 1914, the world was characterized by a system of European domination. Strayer himself talks about the European era. And this era is characterized by European dominance both at the political, the economic, and at the ideological level. Politically, Europe controls almost the entirety of the world in a system of informal and formal imperial or colonial systems. For example, pretty much all of Africa is controlled by one European power or another. European states are also the dominant military powers in the world and the leading producers of military technology. So they are super powerful political players. Also, they are the richest countries in the world. They were the first to industrialize. They were the most industrialized by 1914. And a solid percentage of total world manufacturing happened in Europe. And last of all, ideologically, European ideas even were beginning to become dominant during this time period. Ideas of the Enlightenment, of nationalism were spreading around the world, and European racist ideologies were used to justify colonial systems around the world and were widely accepted even by non-European peoples, for example, by the Japanese. All of this is going to fall apart over the next 30 years. As a result of the world wars and the Great Depression, Europe is going to essentially self-destruct, and we are going to see by 1945 the rise of a completely new global system in which Europe plays a minor part. Europe itself is going to be politically dominated by the United States and the USSR, who are going to set up spheres of influence in West and East Europe, respectively. The colonial empires set up by the European powers are going to collapse as these states engage in successful struggles for independence. And new international organizations such as the United Nations and the World Trade Organization are going to limit European power and even the power of most countries. And international cooperation is going to become a much larger feature of world history. So these videos are basically looking at how does this happen? How do the world wars help to break the system of European dominance and allow for this new global system to emerge? That's what we're going to talk about in these videos, and we're going to start with World War I. So let's start by looking at the impact of World War I on Europe. World War I was primarily a European struggle. Some people have even called it the European Civil War. In this struggle, the major powers of Europe basically pick sides and then spend 4 years murdering each other with incredible efficiency. In 4 years, almost 20 million people are going to die in Europe. These are both civilians and soldiers. This is a massive cost to the manpower of Europe. On top of that, you are also going to see pretty much every single European country find itself massively in debt, largely to the United States, who loans a bunch of money to its allies. On top of both the human cost and the economic cost, there is also ideological cost. Europeans before World War I had been saying that they were the most rational, the most advanced, and the most civilized, and they used these ideas to justify their dominant position in the world. But World War I clearly demonstrates that Europe doesn't know what it's doing because no rational civilization would have fought this war. And so this leads to a lot of people to begin questioning whether or not Europe is really special in any kind of way. Um, on top of this huge cost, Europe also sets up a very unsatisfying peace agreement at the peace conference in Paris, known as the Paris Peace Conference. And this is where the European powers and the world powers get together to determine what the world is going to look like after World War I. The Paris Peace Conference is guided by an idea called the self-determination of peoples. The self-determination of peoples is basically a nationalist concept, and it says that the world is divided up into quote unquote peoples, that is, unique nations or unique groups of people who belong together. And the idea here is that rather than setting up a new imperial system, Europe should be divided up according to peoples, and all the different peoples of Europe will get their own country. And this leads to the creation of a bunch of new countries. The imperial states of Eastern Europe are carved up, and new borders are drawn to create new nations for peoples who beforehand were being controlled by Germany, Russia, or Austria. So you get the rise of states like Poland and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Yugoslavia. And the idea was that each of these nations represented a people who for the first time would be allowed to determine their own destiny. So that is the idea of the self-determination of peoples. This idea is inherently unstable because it's not 100% clear who belongs to what people. Like where exactly do you draw the line between Poland and Czechoslovakia or Poland and Germany? There is no clear way to do this, and this leads to a lot of people being angry on all sides. It also leads to a lot of fighting and bickering among all of the new states. Probably the largest weakness of the Paris Peace Conference, however, was the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was designed to keep Germany together, but to severely punish them. So Germany loses its entire navy, most of its army, loses crucial bits of territory, and is forced to pay a truly astronomical reparation payment, primarily to France and Great Britain. This is really basically impossible, and Germany is put in a very bad position from the very beginning. Many Germans are going to view this as deeply unfair, and this is going to help to lead to the rise of the Nazis in Germany, who promised to get rid of the Treaty of Versailles. So anyway, World War I in Europe basically sets Europe up for both the Great Depression and for renewed nationalist conflicts leading to World War II. They're set up for the Great Depression because they are super in debt to the United States and they're dependent on the United States for economic support. Thus, when the United States goes under in 1929, Europe is going to get sucked in too. And the disputes about borders and the idea that of nationalist groups determining territory is going to help to lead to the rise of ultranationalist governments like fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. On the global stage, you see a number of pretty important changes resulting from World War I. First of all of the surviving traditional land-based empires that were still hanging on by 1914 are now out of the picture. The Ottoman Empire, the Austrian Empire, and the German Empire all collapse and are broken down into smaller nation states. So the Ottoman Empire collapses into Turkey, Austria breaks apart into Austria and Hungary and Yugoslavia, and Germany is forced to give up a bunch of territory and goes from being the German Empire to being the Weimar Republic. All of those three powers, the Ottomans, the Austrians, and the Germans, were all on the losing side of World War I. Russia's a little different. Russia is actually on the winning side, but they are knocked out of the war before the war is over, and they end up getting overthrown by a communist revolution. We are going to talk a lot more about the communist revolution in our next unit. But all you need to know for right now is that World War I was so stressful on the European economy, or on the Russian economy and the Russian political system, that they were unable to prevent a total takeover by communist revolutionaries. On the other side, for the winning powers, you actually see a continuation of their global colonial systems. Britain, France, and the United States all keep their colonies, and Britain and France actually expand their colonial system at the cost of the Ottomans and the Germans. However, even though these colonial systems continue, they are much weaker than beforehand, both because European countries are now deeply in debt and don't have the money to continue to expand and control these territories, but also because of the spread of nationalist and communist ideas to these territories. The idea of the self-determination of peoples spreads to these territories, and now you have people in India and Vietnam saying, why don't we get to determine our future? Aren't we a people just like the Poles and just like the Germans? And you get communist propaganda coming out of Russia, spreading around the world saying that all the poor working people of the world should unite to overthrow the colonial empires. This is an appealing message. A couple other places that are very significantly affected by World War I include the Middle East and East Asia. Let's look at the Middle East first. So first of all, the Ottoman Empire ends up picking the wrong side. The Ottoman Empire was already very weak and going through a period of turmoil, trying to figure out how to adapt to the modern world. They decide to get involved with World War I, and this causes the Ottoman Empire to finally collapse. Basically what happens is the Ottoman Empire joins the side of the Germans and the Austrians, but the war effort is super costly and super unpopular. So you get people all over the Ottoman Empire revolting against the Ottoman government and trying to fight for their independence. The most important of these was the Arab Revolt. What happened there is that people in the Arabian Peninsula who did not identify with the Ottoman Empire decided to fight against the Ottoman Empire to try and create their own independent state. And as a result of that, Arabia is going to become independent after World War I. In an attempt to fight back and keep control of their territory, the Ottomans are going to implement a number of genocidal measures, specifically against the Armenian minority. The Armenians were a primarily Christian group living over here next to Russia, and the Ottomans were afraid of an Armenian revolt, and so they killed 1.5 million Armenians in an attempt to maintain control of that region. This doesn't work. The Ottomans are soundly defeated, and in the aftermath of World War I, the Ottoman Empire is broken up. Turkey is allowed to become an independent nation state, and the rest of the Ottoman Empire is divided up into the French or the British colonial empire in an agreement known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where France gets Syria and Britain gets Palestine and Iraq. All right, and last of all, let's look at East Asia. So Japan was actually allied with Britain, France, and the United States, and was therefore technically on the winning side. They didn't actually really do very much fighting, but they were on the right side, so they were recognized at the peace agreement. At the peace agreement, Japan was allowed to take German territories in East Asia. This included a number of strategically important Pacific islands and the German ports in China. And this was great for Japan. They got territory without really any major costs. However, this was really annoying for China. China already had a growing nationalist movement, and they were outraged in at the end of World War I when Japan was allowed to begin acting as an imperial power in China. Chinese people viewed this as a betrayal of the idea of the self-determination of peoples. They thought China should be in control of Chinese territory. So you see the rise of nationalism and anti-Japanese sentiment. You also see the increasing popularity of communism in China. Basically, China felt like Britain and France and everybody had basically sold China out to the Japanese, and the only people who were speaking up for China were the Russians, the communists in charge of the Soviet Union. And so a lot of people in China began to turn to communism as an anti-imperial ideology. This is going to be important later when communists take over China. This is also going to play into the early conflicts in World War II, where Japan is going to invade and take over China, largely because they believed that the Western powers did not really care about China and would be fine with Japan expanding and taking over. So this sets a bad precedent that encourages Japan to continue military expansion in the future. So anyway, that's a quick overview of the major impacts of World War I on the global system. Please email me if you have any questions or you feel like I didn't answer anything.